Rancher buys abandoned ranch for cheap, then finds Apache girl hanged inside John Matthews. Had always been a hard worker, known around town for his dedication to his ranching business. His weathered face and calloused hands told the story of years spent tending to the land. But lately, John had been looking for something new. His current ranch was doing well, but he felt a sense of monotony creeping in. He needed a fresh challenge, a new project that would push him to his limits. One day, while stopping by the local diner for a cup of coffee, he overheard a conversation between two older men. They were discussing the sale of an abandoned ranch on the outskirts of town. The ranch had been empty for years, with no one willing to take it on. The price was unusually low, and both men seemed to think it was a bargain, though they were quick to point out the rumors that surrounded the place. They spoke of the land being cursed, of strange things happening to anyone who dared live there. But to John, these were just old stories meant to scare off the faint-hearted. As John listened, his interest grew. A cheap piece of land far from the town's hustle and bustle could be the perfect place to expand his ranching business. He could use it for grazing, maybe even build a new barn or two. The thought of transforming an abandoned, run-down property into something profitable excited him. So he made up his mind to take a look for himself. The next morning, John set off early in his pickup truck, the road leading him further away from town. The further he drove, the quieter the landscape became. The roads turned into dirt paths, the occasional dust storm swirling around him. When he arrived at the ranch, it looked every bit as desolate as he had imagined. The tall, rusted gate stood half open, and the land was overgrown with weeds, unkept for years. The once sturdy barn now seemed like a crumbling skeleton of its former self. Yet there was a certain charm to the place, something that called to him, urging him to take the plunge. He walked around the property, feeling the soft crunch of dry earth beneath his boots. The land had the potential to be beautiful again, he thought. There was a worn farmhouse, though it was no longer habitable, and the barn, with its large wooden doors, appeared to be the most solid structure left standing. John pictured himself fixing it up, bringing the place back to life. He met with the owner, an elderly woman who lived in town. She explained that the ranch had been in her family for generations, but it had been abandoned after her husband passed away. The land had been left to rot, and no one seemed interested in buying it. When John mentioned that he was considering purchasing it, she didn't seem thrilled but didn't protest either. She was tired of looking after the property and hoped someone like him could make use of it. They negotiated for a while, but in the end, the deal was struck. John signed the papers and paid the small asking price. For a ranch of that size, it was a steal. He could hardly believe his luck. The locals had warned him about the ranch's dark past, but John wasn't one to get spooked easily. He was a man of logic and practicality, not superstition. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses, and certainly not in the kind of strange occurrences the town's gossipers had described. As the deal was finalized, John felt a surge of excitement. This was the new beginning he had been hoping for. With the land now in his hands, he could begin planning his work. He could already imagine the fresh start he'd give the ranch, transforming it from a decaying relic into a thriving, productive property. The possibilities seemed endless. He didn't waste any time. The following week, John made his way to the ranch again, this time with a small crew of workers. They came equipped with tools, ready to clear the land, fix up the barn, and start the restoration process. It wasn't long before they began making progress. John was hands-on, working alongside his crew, repairing fences, clearing out weeds, and hauling old timber to be replaced. Despite the work being hard and long, John enjoyed the physical labor. It was satisfying to see the ranch slowly coming back to life under his watch. But as they began working inside the barn, John's excitement began to turn into unease. It wasn't anything specific, just an odd feeling, like being watched. He shrugged it off, attributing it to exhaustion and the long hours spent under the hot sun. But every time he stepped into the barn, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The silence inside was almost suffocating, the air still and heavy. As the days passed, John began to notice strange things. Tools would go missing, only to turn up in places they hadn't been left. At night, the sound of rustling, like footsteps in the dirt, seemed to echo through the quiet. He initially brushed these off as nothing more than the wind or the house settling. But as time went on, the strange occurrences became harder to ignore. One night after a long day of work, John stayed behind to finish a few things. His crew had left, and the only light on the property was the dim glow of a lantern hanging in the barn. As he worked, he heard a faint creaking sound from above. He looked up, expecting to see the old wooden beams groaning under their weight, but then the noise stopped. The air seemed to grow colder, and for a moment he thought he heard a whisper, faint but unmistakable. His heart raced, and he quickly shook off the sensation. It was just his imagination running wild. The next day, John returned to the ranch with a renewed sense of determination. He couldn't afford to be distracted by these strange feelings. There was work to be done, and he was determined to see the job through. But as he approached the barn again, something caught his eye. A small piece of rope hanging from one of the beams. His blood ran cold. He didn't know why, but the sight of that rope stirred something deep within him. Something he couldn't explain. He didn't want to think about it any longer, but it nagged at him. It wasn't long before John decided to investigate further, looking deeper into the history of the ranch. He began speaking to the locals more often, asking about the past, hoping to uncover the truth behind the rumors he had been hearing. The more he learned, the more unsettling the story became. He heard whispers of a young Apache girl who had once lived on the ranch, a girl who had mysteriously vanished years ago. But no one seemed to know what had truly happened to her. Some said she had run away, others claimed she had been taken. But the one thing that everyone agreed on was that something terrible had occurred on this land, a dark secret that no one wanted to talk about. John's curiosity grew stronger. There was something more to the land, something he needed to understand. But as he dove deeper into the ranch's past, he would soon uncover the shocking truth, something that would change everything he thought he knew about the land he had bought. The morning after the unsettling discovery of the rope hanging in the barn, John Matthews woke with a sense of unease. He had tried to push aside the strange feeling that had settled over him the night before, but it lingered. As he made his way to the ranch that day, the usual excitement he had felt about his new venture was now clouded by a nagging thought. He couldn't shake the image of the rope and the eerie sensation that something or someone was watching him. The ranch that had once seemed like a fresh opportunity now felt different. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it wasn't the same. Arriving at the property, John tried to focus on the work ahead. The barn, the house, and the land all needed attention. His goal was to fix the place up, breathing new life into the ranch that had been abandoned for so long. The day was sunny and bright, perfect for getting things done. Yet even as he walked through the familiar surroundings, the air felt heavier, thicker, as though the land itself held a secret it didn't want to reveal. John stood at the entrance to the barn, looking at the space that had once housed animals and tools. The wooden beams above still creaked with every breeze, but it was more than the usual sounds of an old building. There was something else now, something subtle yet disturbing. It was like the barn itself was holding its breath, waiting. With a deep breath, John steeled himself and walked inside, determined to make progress. He had no time for fear or superstition. As he entered, the musty smell of old hay and rotting wood hit him. Dust particles floated in the air like tiny, invisible ghosts. John was no stranger to the smell of old barns, but today it felt different. He walked deeper into the space, stepping over broken wooden planks and abandoned tools. The barn was a mess, but it was his mess now. He could see the potential in it. This structure could be salvaged with enough work, and the land around it could be turned into something profitable. But that thought wasn't enough to quiet the whispers in his mind. A few hours passed as John worked, but his focus kept slipping. He felt as though someone was watching him from the shadows. Every now and then he'd glance over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there. But each time, the space was empty. The barn was silent, save for the occasional creak of the wood or the rustle of wind outside. Just as he was about to grab another tool, something caught his eye. It was a small, faded photograph lying in the corner of the barn. It was tucked beneath an old wooden crate, as if someone had placed it there on purpose. Curious, John knelt down and picked it up. The photo was worn and yellowed with age. It showed a group of people standing in front of the barn smiling. But what caught John's attention was a young girl in the front row. She had dark hair and a shy smile, her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed out of place for someone so young. John couldn't shake the feeling that there was something about this girl, something that connected her to the strange events that had been happening on the ranch. The photo seemed innocent enough at first, but as John stared at it, he felt an overwhelming sense of dread. He had no idea who the girl was, but he felt compelled to know more. Who was she? Who was she in this photo? And why did it feel like she was staring right at him from the past, as though she was trying to tell him something? He put the photo in his pocket and left the barn. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity, but John's mind was elsewhere. He could no longer ignore the feeling that the ranch was hiding something. It was as if the land itself was trying to communicate with him, trying to reveal something it didn't want him to know. But what could it be? He had to find out. The following morning, John decided to ask around town. He needed answers, and the locals might have the key.
He visited the small diner where he had first heard about the ranch.
The same group of elderly men were there, sitting at their usual table, talking about the weather and local gossip. John took a deep breath and approached them. They looked up as he sat down, and he could feel their eyes on him, as if they knew exactly what he was there for. "Morning, John!" One of the men said, his voice gravelly from years of smoking. "How's the new ranch going?" "It's coming along," John replied, trying to sound casual. "But I've been hearing some strange things about it. People talk about the place being cursed. Can you tell me anything about that?" The men exchanged glances, and the air in the diner seemed to grow heavier. For a moment, it was as if no one wanted to speak. But then, the oldest of the group, a man named Sam, leaned in and spoke in a low voice. "It's not just talk, John," Sam said, his eyes darting around to make sure no one else was listening. "There's a lot more to that ranch than you think." "It's got a dark history. People have tried to live there before, but something always happens. Things go wrong. They either leave or, well, they don't stay for long." John was intrigued but skeptical. He had heard rumors about other properties around town, but he hadn't given them much thought. It was easy to dismiss old stories as just that. Stories. But this felt different. There was an edge to Sam's voice that made John feel uneasy. "What happened to the family who lived there before?" John asked, his curiosity getting the best of him. Sam sighed and took a slow sip of his coffee before answering. "They were a family of Apache descent. The girl you found in the barn, she was part of that family. But no one knows what really happened to them. Some say they were killed, others think they left. But there's one thing everyone agrees on. The girl's death, well, it wasn't natural. And that's what the land doesn't want you to know." John felt a chill run down his spine. The story was starting to make sense, but it also raised more questions. What had happened to the girl? Why was she left to die alone on the ranch? And why did it feel like the land was holding on to the answers, unwilling to let go? He left the diner that day with a heavy heart. The ranch wasn't just a business venture anymore. It was something far more complicated. As he drove back to the property, he couldn't stop thinking about the girl in the photo and the chilling words Sam had spoken. The mystery of the ranch was only beginning to unfold, and John had a feeling that it was going to be more than he bargained for. That night, as John lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The sounds of the wind outside were louder than usual, and the darkness felt oppressive. He pulled the covers tight around himself and closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. The image of the girl's face, frozen in time in the photograph, haunted him. What had happened to her? What did the ranch want from him? As the minutes turned to hours, John's thoughts spiraled. The ranch was no longer just a property he had bought. It had become something much more. It was a place filled with questions, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to uncover the answers. But he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't rest until he found out what had happened to the Apache girl and what secrets the ranch was keeping from him. John woke up the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. The unsettling words Sam had spoken the day before echoed in his mind. As he made his way back to the ranch, there was something he needed to understand, something he couldn't shake off. His mind was full of questions about the Apache girl, the family that had once lived on the ranch, and why no one seemed to have any answers. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that the land itself was holding secrets, secrets it didn't want anyone to uncover. His first task was to look deeper into the girl's history. The picture he had found in the barn had been a clue, but it was just the beginning. He needed to know more about the girl, her family, and what had happened to them. To do that, he knew he had to go back to town and speak with the older residents, the ones who had been around long enough to remember the ranch's past. As John made his way to the local library, he couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. The land had always felt old, but now, with the knowledge of its dark history, it seemed even older, as though it was steeped in something that time couldn't erase. He stepped into the dusty library and found the librarian, a quiet woman named Mrs. Green, sitting behind a desk filled with old books. She smiled at him as he walked in. "Can I help you, Mr. Matthews?" she asked kindly, setting down her pen. "I hope so," John replied. "I'm looking for information about the family that used to live on the ranch I bought." "It was a long time ago, about 20 or 30 years, I think. It was an Apache family, I believe." Mrs. Green's face shifted slightly, the smile fading into something more neutral. She didn't say anything for a moment, and John noticed her hesitation. "Well, we don't have much in the way of records on them," she said slowly. "But I do recall some stories. They were a quiet family, kept to themselves mostly. But there were a lot of rumors about them, about their connection to the land. Some people thought they were here to claim something, maybe because of the land's history with the Apache tribe. But not much is really known. There were a few families in the area at the time who spoke about them, but no one ever really talked about what happened after they disappeared." John felt a wave of frustration, but he didn't show it. He needed answers. "Can you point me in the right direction? Maybe talk to someone who remembers more about them?" Mrs. Green thought for a moment and then nodded. "There's one person I can think of. Old Man Jacobs. He used to work for the family when they were around. You might want to talk to him. He lives out by the edge of town in a little cabin. He doesn't get many visitors these days, but if anyone knows about the ranch, it's him." Thanking Mrs. Green, John left the library and drove toward the outskirts of town, his mind racing. Old Man Jacobs. He might hold the answers John was desperately searching for. As he pulled up to the cabin, he noticed it was much smaller than the ranch house, with ivy creeping up the sides of the wooden walls. The yard was overgrown, and the faint smell of wood smoke lingered in the air. John knocked on the door, and after a moment it creaked open, revealing a frail old man with a scruffy beard. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice raspy. "I'm John Matthews," John said, shaking the man's hand. "I bought the old ranch down the road. I've been hearing stories about the Apache family that used to live there, and I was hoping you could tell me what happened to them." Old Man Jacobs stared at him for a moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then, with a long sigh, he stepped aside and motioned for John to come in. The cabin was small and cluttered, filled with old photographs and worn furniture. A fire crackled softly in the hearth, adding warmth to the otherwise chilly room. Jacobs gestured for John to sit as he shuffled over to a chair near the fire. "So, you've got the ranch, huh?" Jacobs asked, his voice low. Not many people dared take it on after what happened there. John frowned, leaning forward. "What do you mean by that?" Jacobs looked at him for a long moment, his eyes distant. "I worked for the Apache family for years, back when they were still around. They were quiet people, kept to themselves mostly. But there was always something about that place, something in the air. Some said the land was cursed. I never put much stock in that, but I can't deny there were strange things happening around there. No one could explain it." John's curiosity deepened. "What kind of strange things?" Jacob shook his head slowly, as though recalling painful memories. "Well, for one thing, the girl you found in the barn. She wasn't just any girl. She was part of a larger story, something that goes back even further than the family itself." Her people had been living on that land for generations, and there was a reason they stayed there, a reason no one else understood. The ranch wasn't just a home for them. It was a place of significance. But they never talked about it, not to anyone. John's mind raced as he listened. He had suspected there was something more to the story, and now it seemed like Jacobs was about to reveal something important. The girl, Jacobs continued, his voice lower now. She didn't just disappear like everyone thought. She was part of a much bigger plan, a plan that went back to the days when the Apache were first pushed off their land. The family thought they could find something buried on that ranch. But the truth is, they never found it. And before they could, well, something happened to them. Something no one can explain. John sat in silence, absorbing the weight of Jacob's words. What was it the family had been looking for? What had they believed was hidden on the ranch? And why had the girl's death been so mysterious? I don't know what they were looking for, Jacob said as though reading John's mind. But I know this. The ranch has always had a pull on people. It has a way of drawing people in, and once you're there, it's hard to leave. Some people say it's the land itself, and maybe that's true, but I've always believed there's something buried there, something that's been waiting for the right person to find it. John stood up, feeling a mixture of excitement and fear. There was something more to this ranch than just an abandoned property, something far more significant, something hidden deep within the land. As he thanked Jacobs and left the cabin, he felt the weight of the old man's words settle over him. The ranch was no longer just a business venture. It was a mystery that needed to be solved. As John drove back to the ranch, he couldn't help but wonder if he was meant to uncover the truth. Maybe he had been drawn to the place for a reason, and maybe the answers he was seeking were closer than he realized. The only question was, what would he find when he dug deeper into the ranch's past? The days after his conversation with Jacobs left John with a lot to think about. The idea that the Apache family had been looking for something buried on the land was unsettling. But what could it be? What could possibly be so important that the family would go to such lengths to stay on the ranch despite the strange occurrences surrounding it? And why had the girl who had once lived there been found hanging in that barn, left to die alone? The questions piled up in John's mind, but no answers seemed to come easily. The ranch, which had once seemed like a fresh start, was now beginning to feel more like a trap. Each morning when John drove up to the property, he felt as if the land itself was watching him, waiting for him to uncover its secrets. It was as though something invisible was guiding him, pushing him toward the truth, yet every step forward only seemed to lead to more mysteries. Determined to understand what had happened to the Apache family, John decided to take a trip to the local historical society. If there were any records that could shed light on the family's past, this was where he would find them. The Historical Society was a small building, tucked away behind the main street of town. Inside, it was filled with dusty old books and photographs, each telling a story of the area's past. John was greeted by a woman named Margaret, the curator of the Historical Society. She was older, with silver hair and glasses perched on the end of her nose. When he told her what he was looking for, her expression changed slightly, though she didn't say anything immediately. Instead, she led him to a back room filled with filing cabinets and boxes of old papers. "I'll see what I can find," Margaret said, her voice low as she pulled open one of the cabinets. For what felt like hours, John sat in silence, flipping through old documents and newspapers. As he sifted through the papers, he began to uncover more details about the Apache family who had lived on the ranch. They were named the Thunderbird family, and from what he could gather, they had been a quiet but respected family in the area. The father, a man named Elias Thunderbird, had been known for his connection to the land. He was said to have deep knowledge of the area's history, particularly its ties to the Apache tribe. But there was very little information about the family's final years on the ranch. Most of the documents were sparse, filled with vague references to their disappearance. According to one article, Elias and his wife had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind their daughter, the girl who John had found in the barn. It was the last paragraph of an old newspaper article that caught John's attention. It read, "The Thunderbirds had been searching for something, though no one knew what. Local legend tells of an ancient artifact hidden somewhere on the land, something that had been passed down through generations of Apache warriors. But despite their efforts, no one ever found it." John's heart raced as he read the article again. An artifact hidden somewhere on the ranch? This could be the key to everything. The reason why the Thunderbird family had stayed on the ranch, the reason the girl had been left alone to die, and the reason the ranch seemed so alive with strange energy. With this new information in hand, John felt both excited and apprehensive. He had to find out more. He had to find whatever the Thunderbird family had been searching for. But where could he possibly begin looking? That evening, John returned to the ranch. As he walked around the property, his eyes scanned every corner, every nook and cranny. He felt drawn to the land in a way he couldn't explain. It was as though it had been calling to him, urging him to uncover its secrets. He walked toward the barn again, the place where it all began. As he stepped inside, the old wood creaked beneath his boots, and he looked around. The place was still filled with dust and debris, but it felt different now. The silence felt more profound, more intense. John stood in the center of the barn, thinking about the Thunderbird family and the artifact they had been looking for. He knew that the key to understanding what had happened to them lay somewhere on this property. But where? As he stood there, a thought crossed his mind. The barn had always felt like the center of the mystery, the place where things had gone wrong. But what if it wasn't just the barn? What if the entire ranch held the answers? The land had always felt older than it looked, and now, with the knowledge of the Thunderbird family's search, John wondered if there was something buried beneath the earth itself. The thought was unsettling, but it made sense. The Thunderbird family had been connected to the land in ways that no one else seemed to understand. They had believed there was something hidden here, something of great significance, and if they had truly been searching for it, maybe they had been right. John spent the next few days exploring the ranch with renewed purpose. He combed through the fields and wandered the edges of the property, searching for any signs of the artifact the Thunderbirds had been looking for. He even went to the creek that ran through the property, hoping it might lead to something hidden beneath the water. It wasn't until he ventured to the farthest corner of the land near the edge of the forest that he found something. He had been walking for hours when he noticed an unusual rock formation. It was out of place, too symmetrical, too deliberate to be natural. Intrigued, John approached the formation, carefully examining it. As he got closer, he saw that some of the rocks had been moved, revealing a small hidden cave beneath them. The entrance was narrow, barely big enough for a person to squeeze through. John hesitated for a moment, but his curiosity got the best of him. He crouched down and crawled into the cave, his heart pounding in his chest. The air inside was cool and damp, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed through the small space. He used a flashlight to light the way, shining it on the walls of the cave. The rocks were covered in ancient carvings, symbols he didn't recognize but that looked strangely familiar, almost as if they were part of the Apache heritage. At the far end of the cave, John found something that made his heart stop. A small stone chest, hidden among the rocks. It was intricately carved, its surface worn smooth by time. As he carefully opened it, John's breath caught in his throat. Inside, there was an ancient object wrapped in cloth. He gently unwrapped it, revealing a beautiful, ornate necklace, its design unlike anything he had ever seen. The necklace was made of stone, its surface decorated with intricate patterns and symbols. It was undoubtedly old, ancient, even. John's mind raced. This must be what the Thunderbird family had been searching for, the artifact that had been passed down through generations, the one that had eluded them for so long. He had found it. As he held the necklace in his hands, John realized that the mystery of the ranch was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. There was still so much to learn, so much to uncover. The Thunderbird family's search had led them to this moment, And now it was his turn to understand the significance of what he had found. The land had given him the answers, but what would he do with them? And how would the discovery of this artifact change the course of his life? As John made his way out of the cave, the necklace safely in his possession, he couldn't shake the feeling that the ranch's secrets were far deeper than he could have ever imagined. He had unlocked the first of many doors, but what lay behind them was still unknown. One thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. As John stepped away from the cave holding the ancient necklace in his hands, a strange sense of urgency washed over him. The discovery of the artifact had answered many of the questions that had been swirling in his mind for days, but it had also opened up new mysteries he had no choice but to confront. What was the true significance of this necklace? And why had the Thunderbird family gone to such lengths to protect it? John's mind raced as he made his way back to the ranch house. He couldn't ignore the fact that the land seemed to hold a strange power over him. The deeper he dug into the ranch's history, the more he felt connected to it, as if the land itself was trying to tell him something. He had found the necklace, but it was clear that this was just the beginning. There was still so much to uncover, and John knew that if he didn't continue his search, the answers would remain just out of reach. He couldn't go back to living the way he had before. This was bigger than a simple ranching project. This was a legacy, a piece of history that had been buried for generations, waiting for someone to uncover it. John had been that someone, but now the question was, what was he supposed to do with the knowledge he had gained? As he sat down at the table inside the ranch house, John looked at the necklace. Its intricate carving seemed to glow softly in the dim light of the room, almost as if it were alive. The more he stared at it, the more he felt that it was connected to something much larger than the Apache family and their lost past. The symbols on the necklace, while mysterious, seemed to speak to him in a way he couldn't explain. It was as though the artifact was calling him to understand its true purpose. John thought about the Thunderbird family, particularly the young girl he had found hanging in the barn. Her life had been tragic, cut short in such a horrific way, and yet there was something about her that had drawn him in from the moment he saw her picture. It was as if she had been trying to tell him something, as if her death was not just an accident but a part of a larger story. A story that John now found himself a part of. He had learned from Jacobs and the others in town that the Thunderbird family had never fully explained their purpose on the ranch, but the search for this artifact had been central to their lives. They had believed the necklace held power, a power that could change the course of their future. But why had they left it behind? Why had they abandoned the search, leaving it to the next generation? John's thoughts were interrupted when a knock on the door startled him. He hadn't been expecting anyone, and for a moment he wondered if the land itself was reaching out to him again. He stood up slowly, walking toward the door. When he opened it, he found Margaret from the Historical Society standing on the porch, looking both concerned and curious. "I thought you might want to know," she said quietly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I've been doing some digging of my own. I found something that might help explain the necklace you discovered." John raised an eyebrow. "What did you find?" Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out an old leather-bound journal. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded in some spots, but it was clear that it had been carefully preserved. "This belonged to Elias Thunderbird," she said, handing the journal to John. "I thought it might be important. I've been researching his family for years, and this journal was one of the last things he left behind. It might give you some answers." John took the journal and sat down at the table. As he flipped through the pages, he could see that it was filled with Elias's notes, sketches, and references to various places on the ranch. But what caught his attention immediately was the mention of the necklace. Elias had written about it often, speaking of its power and its importance to the Apache people. According to the journal, the necklace was not just a symbol. It was a key to something greater. "The necklace holds the key to the land's power," John read aloud. "It has the ability to unlock what has been hidden for centuries. The Apache have guarded it for generations, waiting for the right person to come along and claim it." John's heart raced. This was the confirmation he had been looking for. The necklace was not just a relic of the past. It was the key to something much more significant. But what was it unlocking? And why had the Thunderbird family been so determined to protect it? Margaret watched John carefully as he read through the journal.
"There's more!"
she said. Elias mentions that the necklace is tied to a sacred place on the ranch, a place where the land and the spirit of the Apache are connected. But it's not just about finding the place, it's about understanding the history and the purpose of the land itself. The Apache believed the ranch was a place of power, and the necklace was meant to protect that power. John's mind was spinning. A sacred place, a hidden power. What did it all mean? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the necklace was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. He had uncovered the first clue, but there was still so much left to discover.
"I need to find this place," John said, looking up from the journal.
The place Elias wrote about. It's the only way I'll truly understand what the necklace means. Margaret nodded, her expression serious. I think you're right. But be careful, John. The land has a way of changing people. It's as though it doesn't want its secrets to be revealed. People who have tried to uncover them before have never returned the same. The Thunderbird family, they were never the same after they came to the ranch. John felt a shiver run down his spine. He had already felt the land's strange pull, the sense that something was watching him, guiding him. But now, with Margaret's words in his mind, he realized that this was no simple quest for treasure. It was a journey into something deeper, something that could change everything he knew about the world. That night, as John lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about the journal, the necklace, and the sacred place Elias had written about. He knew he had to go back to the ranch and continue his search. The land was calling to him, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. The next morning, John set out again, this time with a clear purpose. He needed to find the sacred place, the place where the Apache had hidden their secrets for centuries. He walked across the ranch, following the clues from the journal, his mind focused on the task ahead. The land felt different now, alive with energy, as if it were responding to his presence. As he reached the edge of the property, he found himself standing in front of a dense thicket of trees. The path ahead was narrow, barely visible, but he knew this was the way. The trees seemed to part slightly as he stepped forward, almost as if they were welcoming him. John took a deep breath and walked forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what he would find, but he knew this was the moment he had been waiting for. The answers were just ahead, hidden beneath the earth, waiting for him to uncover them. The land had revealed its secrets to him, but what he would discover next would change everything he thought he knew about the ranch, the Apache people, and the necklace he had found.